Hey friends, it is me, Bobby B. Thank you for being here. Today's episode is a replay of episode 8.1. It was when I had a very deep and philosophical conversation with luxury wedding photographer and educator KT Mary. And the reason that I'm playing it for you again today is because I have hundreds and hundreds of more followers than I did at that time. And I thought that this interview is really important. If you haven't gone back through the archives, you can jump in with this one right now. It's very pertinent to what is happening at this time and continues to happen in my career as well as in the careers that I help with my students. And it's what I learned from KT has really fostered a lot of things that I now do now in my business. And so I thought it was fitting that I would share our discussion in celebration and anticipation of my own group mentorship program that is going to be running again very soon. It's called Storyteller School. It's a 12-week group mentorship with multiple one-on-one coaching sessions with me. And what we do in Storyteller School is I really help you to break up with the pressure to be perfect. And I guide you into stepping into a deeper expression of your creativity through documentary wedding and or family photography. And how we do that is by truly understanding what you bring to the table. And very few of us can definitively say that with confidence. And that is the impetus of Storyteller School, for you to have that guidance and mentorship for someone to really fully understand you and see you and be able to guide you into a brand and marketing and portfolio and website that will actually totally blow your own socks off, much less every client who comes across your page. We are all here for a reason, my friend, and it is so easy to, one, not know what that reason is, but two, to get really lost and muddled with everything else that is out there, all of the other photographers, all of the other education. This is a bringing together of everything in my journey that has gotten me to where I am. And so if my coaching or my interviews or my anything that I put out there tends to resonate with you, Storyteller School is what will bring you into the next chapter of your journey, the next chapter of your life, where you really step into and own who you are as an artist and as a business person. So there's lots of really tangible, clear business advice, but it is all guided by your own personal experiences and your perspective with which you see the world, which is what really makes Storyteller School beautiful, is seeing and understanding who we truly are at the end of it and being able to translate that into a portfolio and website that is going to draw in the people that you are here to serve. So if that is remotely interesting, there is a link in the show notes that you can get on the little newsletter list that will walk you through everything that Storyteller Schools offers. And you will have the opportunity at the end of that workflow to be able to save up to $1,000 off of the group mentorship if you sign up before the end of December. So I hope that entices you, and I hope that you jump on that newsletter list. And without much more ado, here is KT Mary. Hi, friend. Welcome to the Tilt and Shift podcast. Thank you for being here. Today's guest came into my life about a year and a bit ago. And since then, my world has quite drastically changed. And how this came about is because at the end of December of 2021, I noticed a feeling in my body of a lack of fulfillment. And it kind of surprised me because I had been hitting my financial goals for the last probably 5 years. At that point, I had been wanting to hitting 6 figures was a big deal for me, and I had been doing that for a while. And it struck me that that was no longer motivating me, that it didn't feel the way that I had thought it would when I had originally set that goal. And so I started thinking, I might be missing out on something. Like there's some sort of fundamental thing I'm missing in getting this goal and feeling like meh. Like cool, yay, like grateful, but also I'm just doing things in the same way. And what I noticed was that I had achieved these goals based on being reactive. I was reacting to what was coming to me. I was shooting a lot of things that I did not enjoy shooting. I was making good money doing it because I didn't really feel like I had much to lose because I wasn't enjoying it. So why don't I charge more for it? I was still getting paid, but I wasn't loving what I was doing. And my whole reason for becoming a photographer was because I loved doing it and I wanted to love the lifestyle that I would have the power to create by being my own creative business person, being my own boss. So at the end of 2021, I was like, I've got to do something different. Like I'm missing something in this world. I felt a need to go towards the things that I had always resisted or judged or thought that they didn't apply to me. In a sense, I would recognize that my mind was kind of closed, or I had plateaued in my learning and in how I thought about the world. And so I vowed to get curious about the things that I knew nothing about, and particularly about the things that intimidated me or that I resisted learning more about or thought I knew about and like didn't think it was for me. So started learning about mindset, and it's funny because this podcast has so much to do with mindset. And a year and a half ago, that was not me. I have changed considerably on this journey. And one of the things that really sparked this journey was the internet, the algorithm started telling me about this thing called scarcity mindset. And I was like, hold up. Yes, this is me. I am terrified of not having money. I am constantly feeling like it's never enough. I am worried that it's going to be all taken away from me without my control. I was realizing how I felt about money was very negative, and yet I was drawn to make it. So that disconnect bothered me. I started learning about scarcity mindset, and we'll talk more about that in episodes to come. But when you learn about scarcity mindset, you also start learning about something called abundance. And the algorithm started advertising something to me. And that something was how to build an irresistible brand. And it was being provided by someone named KT Mary. Now, there's two things here that really spoke to me because they're two things that I had always kind of avoided. One being luxury photography. I had never, ever considered myself anywhere near the realm of luxury photography. And I had never really put much work into my brand. I knew that I had to do something different in my business because I didn't like where it was going. I was doing everything I could, and I really felt the need to do something different. And both of these things were very, very different. Finding out what my brand actually was and learning that from someone in the luxury wedding photography field. So I took her 3-day course, or was it 5 days? Regardless, there's a link to it in the show notes. And it was extraordinarily helpful. It helped me absolutely refine the way I looked at my business and myself and my brand. And I was so shifted by it that I signed up for her course, The Abundance Plan. And that again was a giant game changer. And it's honestly what got me almost all the way to where I am now. And so I am delighted, thrilled, ecstatic to share with you our guest today, Katie Mary. Katie is a renowned photographer, and I'm just going to read you her bio here. From the islands of the Maldives to the Serengeti bush to the rolling hills of the Irish countryside, photographer Katie Mary has traversed the globe shooting exclusive destination weddings and fashion editorials. Katie's signature style blends her background in fine art and her years of experience assisting some of the world's most celebrated fashion photographers. She has been named a top wedding photographer by Harper's Bazaar, Martha Stewart Weddings, The Knot, and a rising star by Photo District News magazine. Now, along with her husband and business partner Chad, Katie is sharing her knowledge with photographers looking to refine their businesses and create purpose-filled lives. Hello. That's exactly what I was looking for. A passionate animal lover and conservationist, Katie puts giving back first. She donates a portion of all her sales from her 2 fine art print shops and her online education sales. When she's not working, she's running, literally. Katie logs at least 5 miles in every city she visits, and I'm so stoked she's here. Hello, Katie.
Hello, hello.
How are
Thank you so much
you?
for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, so fun.
Um, I was just like, I just recorded your introduction and
Oh.
just before this, and I thought I might share with you a little bit about what I said in there. And part of the reason that I've asked you to be here, and it's the reason why I have almost all of my guests, is because they've played some sort of pivotal role in how I function either as a human being or as a human being within my business.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and it's and that inspired the podcast is because I really feel that if we share our stories of what helped us to level up or to see the world differently or to um, change or improve our lives or someone else's, those moments in our life, I think that they are coachable. I think that they, when we share them and like break them down into kind of granular actions,
Hmm.
that we can help other people do similar things and apply it to their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how I learn, that's for sure.
Hmm. And so for you in my life, a little bit ago, about a year and a half ago, I recognized that I needed to start looking at the world differently. I needed to
Mm-hmm.
go into rooms where I felt uncomfortable or rooms that I thought weren't for me
Mm-hmm.
because for whatever reason, I thought that they weren't for me.
Yeah,
I had had some sort of dialogue in my brain that I didn't belong there.
of course.
Yes. And then the internet told me about you.
That
So you're
bloody
advertising.
internet, I tell you.
What's that?
That internet, always talking, always talking.
A little bit of a trickster. And so it started advertising the Irresistible Brand Workshop to me.
Hmm.
And that really changed how I looked at what I was doing because previously I was doing things out of scarcity. I was doing things because I wanted to make 6 figures and I wasn't thinking about why I was doing them.
Mm.
And so then your brand workshop really helped me to see that I really need to have a brand. And if I
Mm.
worked on that, maybe I would have more control over what I was doing in my business. And then, of
Cool.
course, that rolled into the incredible program that is the Abundance Plan. And here we are,
And
a
here we
year and a
are.
bit later. Yes. So yes, I just wanted to thank you for that, for creating that space that felt enough for people who don't necessarily, who are looking for something different, or for people who are looking for a way of looking at their work with more intention and more
Mhm.
fulfillment and beyond going through the motions, you know? Yeah,
Hmm.
everything I've learned from you is really about being intentional.
Well, thank you. I deeply appreciate and receive that. I think, like many, I think we're all kind of going through life doing the best we can and trying to find our way. And the things that are going well or not going well, we're all still kind of like, is that working? Is that coming across how I intended it? And so I always deeply appreciate to hear that, because that is so much of, I think, really what I strive or just innately do is really that deep work of, there's got to be more below the surface. There's got to be,
Yeah.
and there's got to be more than just this one marketing strategy. Surely that's not all success is about, right?
Yeah.
And all of that. And so I really do appreciate exploring kind of that other side of that. And then to me, it's also so much more applicable to every facet of your life, not just building a photography business.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's probably where the fulfillment comes in, right?
Hmm.
So when
Hmm.
we recognize where else it plays in our lives.
Hmm.
Do you want to share how you got to this frame of mind, or there are other perspective shifts that you want to talk about?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I think, a million moments that all, we talk a lot about inside the program about like 1%, if we can do
Mhm.
1% a week, like you said, if you can have a shift in your mind, even 1%, that's a lot for an adult with a, formed prefrontal cortex,
Mhm.
like this is, you know, I know a lot of us are like, we're going for the quantum leap, and I'm all for quantum leaps, and I've experienced them myself, but I think most of my journey has been remarkably slow and largely, if someone were to film, with a video camera the whole time, you're like, when do the events start happening? Where's the action? And so, there certainly are little moments that we can carve out, and I think we're going to talk about some of those today. But at least, the first chunk of it was kind of a slow go. Some of the quick things were, in high school, I was one of the lucky few to have a photography school, or a class rather, with a dark room and a
Mhm.
photography teacher. And I took auto shop, I took photography, I took everything. So I was just definitely, I took weightlifting, which I ended up getting a C in, because I couldn't keep upping the amount that I like tapped out at a, you know? And
Yep.
so then your grade is based on, you have to keep like, they want you all to be like bodybuilders, which doesn't work out when you're like a 95-pound,
Mhm.
15-year-old.
Mhm.
But needless to say, I had a great photography a teacher who took me under her wing to compete in a vocational industrial clubs of America, which at the time, I hope they're still around, because we need more vocational people.
Mhm.
And I got a scholarship to photography school, and to several photography schools, but that kind of decided it then, well, okay, guess we're going down this path. And
Mhm.
it ended up being really great, and a real intensive program, and very, very diverse in terms of processing your own film, and learning all the tricks of the trade. That was just when like Photoshop was just starting, so we're
Yeah.
barely on computers scanning things and stuff like that. And then began working for fashion photographers straight out of that program. And that was really like, okay, great, now I'm gonna learn from fashion photographers and be a photo assistant and work sets and all of that. And so just really jumped straight into freelance life, which really suited me well, in terms of, I grew up a military brat, hopping around quite a bit, and had a
Mhm.
lot of jobs to date. So I really had a strong work ethic already, but really had no problem kind of knocking on doors and on studio doors and saying, hey, I want to be on your photo assistant list. And I know I'm a girl, I can still carry stuff, all of that.
Mhm.
And just
Good thing you had
kind
that
of dove
weightlifting
headfirst.
class.
I know. I tell you what, like, it paid off. Well, little did they know, yeah, I spent the last 6 years working as a wrangler on a cattle ranch, and the first task of every day was swinging 100-pound saddles on about 40 horses back. So I was
Yeah.
I was ready. They just, they were judging the book by the cover, if you will.
I love proving them wrong.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's actually, been you've got to look for your motivators where you can. And that's always been one of my core motivators. I would never be the one to say, I can't, I can't carry that, or, the day's getting too long, or I can't be there that early. I was always like, yep, I'll be there. And so I think, you've got to use everything, roadblock, weakness, obstacle, or otherwise, as fuel for where you want to go.
Yeah, I totally agree. And seeing obstacles as opportunities rather
Hmm.
than blocks.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
often,
And not getting too upset that, the world is slightly unfair, I think is important. And I think, not that I don't want a fair world like everybody else, but I also think, you can't get too hung up on it.
hmm hmm. So when you started into fashion photography, were you into it before? Like, had you been like, was that something that was previously interesting to you, or was this something that you were just going into because that's where the path was leading?
Yeah. In photography school, I definitely was like, I still have most of my tear sheets of like, going through magazines and pulling tear sheets and all
Yeah.
of that. So it wasn't, and it's still true to this day. I am never the one that's like, oh, that's Gucci, or that's, Carolina Herrera. Like I know enough now to be dangerous, just because I've got to be like, yeah, no, I think like these designers are amazing. But that was never my thing. I've never, owned a Chanel bag, if you will. Um,
hmm
but I am very drawn to beauty and aesthetic and design. And so that part is what has always intrigued me, is the visuals aspect of it. And there are some things, you don't have to tell me how much it costs. I know that it's well done, well
hmm
crafted, a work of art. And that is, what I have always spotted and kind of sought out. And so that part of it really intrigued me, of kind of how you create beauty, how people come together and, turn some little studio in New York that, on the backside of it is full of catering and makeup and, clipboards. And then on the other side, out comes these amazing photographs that are super inspiring. So that part of it is really like kind of the making of is really interesting to me.
hmm And do you recall a point in your life where it was um like where that suddenly made sense? That why you were drawn to that? The making of?
Well, the other side of it at the time, no. At the time, it was really, if I had a fairy godmother who said, what would you really like to do right now when you get out of photo school? And it was a gap year. To me, I've heard of
Mhm.
these things and like, yeah, just backpack around and travel for like a year and go do cool stuff. Like, duh, like who
I
doesn't want to do that?
I would still like a gap year.
Me too. I'm asking for one this Christmas. And so while I didn't have a gap year, I did kind of go off to Spain for a little bit and just go like, I think I'm just gonna like study Spanish for a minute. I did work for some photographers while I was there, but really just wanted to explore more and just kind of figure it out, like 19-year-olds do.
hmm
And so in doing that, when I started working for fashion photographers, and once again, I worked really hard and was professional. So any
hmm
marketplace, I think that stands out. And so I started getting a lot of repeat photographers asking me to go here and go there. And all of a sudden I was kind of, I wasn't getting my full blown gap year. I was getting to go places and, eat nice food and meet interesting people. So that was the core motivator to start, was really just, I was very aware that I had a lot of the world yet to see, and I wanted to get there and was happy to do that, on the back of a photo shoot.
Um, so your photography kind of became the vehicle
Hmm.
of these greater
Absolutely.
things that you were
Yes.
looking for.
And it still is. 15 years later, it still is. And I always, the other, in addition to the gap year, would have loved to, go to like Columbia or Harvard or something and just sit in those rooms and hear what people are conversing about, and the wisdom being kind of dispensed. And that really became this last 15 years of traveling the world, understanding different cultures, being invited into the center of families on some of their most intimate and meaningful days. You get a real good education on people, how the world works, the differences in cultures, family dynamics, both good and bad. I
Mhm.
think I really I've been in like a master's program of just learning in that sense that, oh, I didn't know families could like actually want to hang out together like 20 times a year and take vacation.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't aware that these existed out in the world. And so even just some of those things of showing just how other people's experiences of what life like is here on this planet has been really interesting. So it was a different type of education. And I think that was what was interesting is I always had certain desires and the universe would always provide them in some way. It just usually looked drastically different than I had imagined it to be or had seen other people maybe go get an education. Mine was a different road, but very, very intense depth, very full of a lot of learnings. And so always very grateful for that.
So you said something interesting. You said you knew what you wanted, but the universe wasn't necessarily giving it to you the way you thought you should get it.
Mm-hmm.
So what did that, because for some people that could mean that they want the wrong thing
Right.
or um they're not on the right path. So what was it about that said to you that your desires were being fulfilled?
Yeah. What's interesting is I think, it's those little learnings along the way that you go, isn't, not many people get invited, say, to the backside of this venue because we're
Mhm.
doing our, say, scouting tour or something, and we're in there with the staff learning kind of all the ins and outs of a property, even like those things. So you go like, most people, even if they're like the real VIP customers that are paying the most, they're still relegated to like, where all the other guests are. And here we are in like the trenches. And I think, there's definitely been a lot of little moments like that where you go like, oh, I actually like this side of it even better. And I think that that's one thing that's been interesting to learn is I think also being part of the crew, if you will, or being
Mhm.
part of versus kind of being a guest. And I've realized I like being part of the crew, the back of house, if you will,
Mhm.
where, that's where in my mind, that's like where, they're truth talking about whatever's happening out there. And they're, really uh, know the ins and outs of everything. And you just get a whole different perspective. And there's a certain level of camaraderie that, kind of happens when everyone's like, yeah, we're all here working together. And so that part of it always has been like an unexpected surprise. There's been little moments along the way where I've definitely realized that of like, yeah, this is like an education. It's not quite like probably like Harvard is, but it's definitely I've been here learning, studying without
Yeah.
even necessarily realizing it.
Yeah, and there's two things I want to comment on there. One, you wouldn't necessarily know that from your work, that your interest and your seeking of the education in behind the photo in
Hmm.
comparison to what we might think when we see one of your images, right? So
Yeah,
that contrast within you is pretty fascinating.
yeah, yeah,
That you produce these images and yet what drew you in there and what you find fulfilling is the back of house, what's happening behind it.
totally. And even sometimes I'm still like, isn't that interesting? Because once again, I am not a stereotypical designer, girly girl, if you will. Obviously, I love all that. Like you look at my work and it's like bigger gown and bigger gown. And I'm like,
More
bring it,
flowers.
Yeah. And I'm so for that. And really the kind of that like divine feminine in a way of really bringing that. I bring even to when I'm photographing, say, wildlife or something like that. I'm really bringing a feminine aspect to it. And yet in my demeanor or character, people probably would not describe me as the most feminine person. I've got my own masculine side of energy. And when you're talking about it's not really about gender things. It's really about like energy, and feminine has its own characteristics as well as masculine. And
Mhm.
so I think what's interesting is I think the idea that our work doesn't also have to be us. And I think that at least for a lot of artists, a work is expression of of maybe something that's not even necessarily what so that part of it has always been really fun to recognize and kind of go, isn't that interesting?
Is that how you reflect on things? Like just kind of regarding their interest, like their
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm very curious. Very, very curious. Like, for example, we were just in London this last weekend during the coronation,
Yeah.
and I would consider myself, familiar with the royals as much as most, between enough TV shows and documentaries, and have certain opinions about the things, but really then being kind of in that vicinity during that time and kind of the buzz about it and everything, I was kind of like, once again, just super curious and drawn into just all of the things. And then you kind of find other aspects of it. Like, I didn't really know this, but the now king, is really into the environment and biodiversity, something I'm deeply passionate about, and has actually written a book about it, and all stuff. And all of these things that maybe, you don't necessarily see the
Mm,
first time you turn over a rock. Sometimes you've
yeah.
got to like turn it over and turn it over again, and walk past it the fifth time, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, isn't that interesting? And so
Yeah.
I think that aspect of it, I think I'm always trying to be curious and see where you can learn new things, and how, once again, like a topic like biodiversity can, maybe doing research on that can somehow be applicable within your business and as an entrepreneur and things like that. And I find the connections everywhere.
Mhm. And I think that's a really important trait for photographers to have,
Hmm.
is to find interest in what your subjects find interesting. Being
Yes.
curious about that curiosity, or being curious about what someone how people present themselves. Um, it's challenging not to bring our own biases to things,
Yeah.
and those biases can really close us down from being able to see what's going
Yes.
on, right?
Yeah, and I think it can be really nuanced because, as you know, from all that I teach as well, we talk a lot about alignment within your business and how you align with the right clients, and really understanding who's right for you. And there's even instances where there's times where a job on paper has come across the line, and I've been like, okay, well, sure, that sounds good. I'm, not necessarily one of the highlights of what I'm looking forward to the year, but okay, great. And then,
Mhm.
we'll get done with the job, and afterwards I'm like, oh my gosh, they were one of our top 10 clients, of the past 2 years. So it is just that constant reminder that we try to become better at, once again, filtering as business owners, but we also still have a amount of openness in all that we do, just as humans and in life experience, because you have to let certain things come in that you're not quite sure where that's going to land on the scale, and sometimes it really will surprise you.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and as you said, oftentimes they're the most kind of gratifying relationships that we
Yes.
end up having, right?
Well,
Probably
and I think
because
then too, because your expectations are also different, and so then you're like, wow, and so that's part of it too. Um, Not just kind of being that, high hitting dopamine seeker, but also being open to the things that maybe go like, okay, like, yeah, sure, that one, it sounds okay, and it is that balance of, does it fit within the boxes of where your business is going? Okay, great. And then do they all have to be, thrill seeking, the most inspiring things ever? Not necessarily. And sometimes they will end up being it, even if you just don't know it on the front end.
Mhm. Have you honed any skills around that? Have you found the formula to understand?
Well, I think, a lot of it is process, and we talk about this a lot with proposals, of just having certain criteria and attuning your listening to really hear what they are saying. A lot of the times clients are telling you exactly what they are, and we're already filtering. You read an email, and then you're in your mind, you're like, oh yeah, they said they can do it on Saturday. And then something happens and you go back and you read, and it's like, that's not at all what the email said. Like, my mind had already like totally conjured it in my favor, like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we do the same thing all the time, where, they're talking, or someone's talking to us, and out of their mouth is coming of like, oh yeah, they're saying exactly what I want to hear. And you're like, no, they're not. They're actually said something totally different.
Yeah.
So I think trying to be a better listener is number one. and really understand and ask the right questions. A lot of the times, if we simply had asked,
Mhm.
well, are you, since you're getting married at sunset, and are you open to doing a first look so all your portraits aren't in the dark? If we don't ask that question, then we can't really be upset when we get to the wedding and we're like, why am I shooting all in the dark? This isn't
Mhm.
working for me.
Yeah.
So definitely gotten better at that and developing more process around that, but then also just really listening to that intuition and then also trusting the process. I think the old me, I mean, don't get me wrong, I have my anxieties just like everybody else, but the old me certainly made it way worse in kind of staying calm with the process or the flows of the seasons. I think it took me about 15 years to realize like every season has been different, every year has been different.
Mhm.
And so it's all kind of want to go like, okay, I'm going to, do just like this. And then I'm going to do this. But one year it's like we're 12 times in Napa. Then one year we're 5 times in Italy. And then one year we're, never leave the US or whatever it may be. It's all going to kind of ebb and flow and kind of trusting that that's all part of the plan too, as long as you're continuing to show up and do your best and do the things, then you need to, if you know that you're doing a good job in that area, then you need to also be okay with just kind of releasing a little bit of that, sense of control.
Yes. Because essentially we have no control.
Yeah, go figure, right?
I think we really get wrapped up in that in terms of we're in control of our businesses. We're making all of these decisions. We're wearing lots of, especially beginning photographers, you're learning how to build websites and you're learning how to market and you're wearing a trillion different hats. All of that feels like you have some modicum of control, right? Because you're making the decisions. But I think we often get a little bit mixed up between like making decisions doesn't necessarily mean you're in control.
Right. Yeah. And even deciding things, like you said, like setting goals. And I'm all for all that 1,000%. So I think this is the thing is sometimes people go to such extremes that like, okay, well, great. If I have no control, well, then I'm just not going to try for anything. And I'm never going to decide anything because, well, I don't have control. Or I'm going to be the opposite and, be white knuckling my goals, just no matter what and forcing them through. And, this all or nothing mentality. And I find a lot of times, even with like sustainability or environmental things that I'm really passionate about, people are that too. Like, well, if you can't, live in the tree in a hammock and wear only hemp clothing, then like, why even bother? And, it's the same
Absolutely.
in our business of
So
like,
polarizing, yeah.
yes, there is, and like, the middle ground is really it's quite a good place to be there. And we see this in the world too, that it is such polarity right now. And we're going like, well, does it need to be that way? Or could we go like, what would kind of make sense in the middle? What sounds fair and equitable? Like what is also serving us in our business right now and kind of having some flow while still aspiring and having some discipline while like having some ease, all of those things.
Hmm. Was that a shift for you when you recognized that? Or do you want to share some of because these are very like you're sharing advanced thought about business, right? So the question is, how did you come up with this, Katie?
Well, I mean, obviously, like we said, that 1% over little things showing their way. But I think part of it was really kind of doing all these things, of doing it all right, quote unquote, um, and really focusing on. So, for example, one time was when I really kind of realized that I needed to actually care about business as much as I care about art, which
Mhm.
was like kind of a rebirth in that area. That that belief of just like, if you just put your head down and work on your art and just become ruthless at creating and solely focus on that, and anything else is somehow impure to your art or a distraction to it or a sellout to it, all of
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
which obviously that is like a pervasive belief within our
Mhm.
communities, that we if we all of a sudden start to focus on creating or looking at price or charging more or just being more business orientated, that then all of a sudden we've lost our way as artists.
Yeah.
We're now just corporate machines churning it along.
Right.
Um, and so that realization for me was a big one. And so then when I started to get really super curious, and that was really from the point of just kind of hitting, I forget which year it was exactly, but I've been, a good 7+ years in the business, just the art thing. And then, kind of feels like I might be plateauing. And I think that's a scary place to be in business,
Yeah.
when you're kind of like, I don't, this wasn't like a short-term thing that then I'm going to like go start my next career yet. Like I'm
Mhm.
still have a lot of space that I want continue to climb in here.
Mhm.
So when you start to feel like it's kind of plateauing out, I think a lot of people, that's when anxiety usually goes through the roof.
Yeah.
And I really just channeled it into learning again and getting super curious again. And
Yeah.
so then just being exposed to other ideas and people and things that aren't in the artist world, and realizing like, oh, there are some people that view this business building stuff just as creatively as we view our art. And that then all of a sudden was like really exciting and new.
Yeah. I think that that's a nice way to frame this is looking at curiosity as a skill.
Mm.
Something that we can develop because
Hmm.
curiosity is what will get us from point A to point B and beyond,
Mm.
right? Um,
Totally.
yeah, I really love this idea. Do you were you always like is that an inborn trait or is curiosity something that you found starting to work for you and so you built it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been highly curious, and it was really applied to things that I was most interested in when I
Mhm.
was younger, which was definitely like the natural world, animals, new skills, though even that's like where I started riding like at a stable in Japan when I was like 9 and learning how to show jump and things, and was like, my parents would drop me off in the morning and pick me up at night. And I was like 9 or 10. And I was like, how did the 9-year-old convince you guys that was a good idea? They're like, I don't know. You just said you wanted to be there and like learn how to feed the horses and whatever. Okay. I've always been persuasive apparently, and curious too.
So when you started and so there's this trope of the starving artist, right? And this is something that
Yeah.
we sort of um and that if we get paid for our art, then we are selling out,
Hmm.
essentially. And there is so you spoke earlier of the middle ground. Do you think that applies? So what is the middle ground between this perception of selling out and this perception of being a pure artist?
Mm. Well, I think if you're in the pure artist mindset, at least for me, you're operating with a certain amount of blinders on, and really like stubborn belief, sense
Mhm.
of I will stand my ground. And I think what happens and where the middle ground comes in is starting to like remove those blinders and start to be more open, and start to also recognize that it doesn't, it's once again, it's never black or white. It's never you can be a great artist or you can, be rich and suck at art. Like,
Yeah.
and that's only once again because we see so many people out there proving that that is not true. That's not true, that there are people there that are wildly talented and also being wildly compensated for it. And
Mhm.
that you can have aspirational goals of maybe have financial goals and have artistic goals, and they can work in harmony with one another. And so I think slowly letting some of those extremist mindset ideas or beliefs, kind of letting them soften. And that's where we like integration of ideas of like those two opposites that you once thought were at war with one another, will actually like they can live harmoniously and actually help one another. And that's,
Mhm.
all that we've seen, and kind of how our education came about. Because I know for me, when my contracts are in order, when I feel like my clients are being taken care of, when my emails are answered, when my books are clean, all
Mhm.
of that, I can now think about just art. I can focus and become a better artist instead of, being wildly anxious because I go like, I haven't answered, any of the 100 emails and people are yelling at me because I haven't delivered their images or whatever it is, and that's another
Yes.
extreme example. But I think it's to prove the point that structure does help us thrive as creatives.
It does. Yes. Let's say that again. Let's
Yeah.
repeat
Let's
that.
put it on a t-shirt and sell it with this podcast.
Yeah, I mean it makes perfect sense when we say it out loud, right? If we have our house in order,
Yeah,
then we have freedom of thought and like freedom of fear and anxiety and worry about these things that really do dictate our comfort and our stability and our safety in the world, like our
of
bills
course.
and groceries and all of that stuff. And also recognize the next level of that is recognizing that if we if we soften a bit and are willing to look at ourselves as a business, we're providing a service and experience for people, then we can make money at it,
Yes.
right?
Yes, and I mean, I think anyone who has a partner or a spouse can know how much a dirty toilet can come between a
Mm,
marriage.
tell me about it. Good
So
Lord.
literally talking about a clean house and like, who's going to clean it on this? And I mean,
Yes.
these types of things could go like, okay, or we could just have someone clean the house every other week. And now we're not fighting about that ever. And we all
Yeah.
feel better. Like, it's the same types of ideas.
I'm
Um,
gonna make a note
and
for myself to book my
yeah.
house cleaner right now.
Yeah, and I think that these are all, once again, we have to earn the right to be able to have these privileges in our lives and business. But I do think then that's also part of the motivation is like looking down the road and going like, okay, right now I'm a up, if you will. I'm in year one of my business, but I know, by year three, I don't want to be doing my QuickBooks anymore. Or,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know eventually I want to outsource my housekeeping and things
Yeah.
like that. So that's part of your plan for growth too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that sometimes artists, if we're in that like strict artist mindset, is we don't really think of the growth that
Right.
we're looking for, right? We're focused solely on our art and not considering that we are going to evolve and grow as artists if we're conscious about it and if we're being curious and if we're
Yeah.
being interested in other things, and opening up those other doors that a purist mindset keeps closed.
And I think a big side effect and something that I'm really passionate to kind of attack head on is the short-sightedness that breeds within our community and industry.
Yeah.
I know nobody was asking me when I got started in this profession about, well, are you putting aside for retirement? Do you have a
Yeah.
long-term plan? And and I say all that because then sometimes it sounds like then we're stepping on the side of like of the starving artist side where we're saying, well, do you have a backup plan? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying be all in on being an artist, but also recognize that someday, you're going to be an artist with more gray hair.
Yeah.
And what is that artist? What are they going to need in terms of support? And you might not at all now, but I can assume that some type of, investment account or savings or emergency fund or, a house that maybe you own a portion of and all of that is probably going to help that artist more in the future. And so I
Mhm.
think just starting to think about these things, and we're all different creatures and have different senses of what makes us feel comfortable and fulfilled in this time here on this planet. But I think thinking about those things and at least working towards them is an important thing, and being aware of them, giving them thought space.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I hope people are listening to, if they listen to anything, they've listened to the last 5 minutes of this. And pay your taxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
so many photographer friends who are in
Forgot that.
arrears and they haven't paid. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like you're creating this anxiety for yourself.
And it really can, it's like the, snowball that just gets bigger.
Yeah.
That you ignore that and then you ignore this and you ignore this. And that's where I go, if you need that Hail Mary of like, okay, that's it. I'm gonna like finally look under the hood and solve this, there's no better day to do it than today.
Yeah.
And then start, baby steps. Like I've luckily been able to own a place that I lived in from a young part of my career. But even still, even just if you can set up like that auto pay where you go like, okay, I can do $100 twice a month, and that's going to go straight to, my Roth IRA. What that little stuff, just knowing that you're doing that, and because you're going to blink twice and 2 years are going to pass, and that's going to be have going on in the background, and you're not even going to notice it.
Yeah.
It's one less dinner out, where you could, eat a healthy box of mac and cheese with some peas and, have your future covered. So,
Did you know that mac and cheese and peas are like one of my favorite meals?
really? Well, I
I
just think
love
eating
it.
pasta without peas is a little sacrilegious. So that's a
I-
whole nother podcast.
I'm wondering if you want to, are there any other shifts that are coming to mind? And I love that you're talking about the little steps, because I don't think that our lives happen in epiphanies, right? There's always
Mm,
little things that are leading towards these like tectonic shifts that tectonic shift has been building,
yeah.
and then suddenly we kind of recognize it. We're like, oh, okay, this has been leading me here, and actually it started, I mean, in hindsight you can see where your path came from. But um what about for you? Are there any others that
Yeah. So, I mean, another kind of this one was more of a epiphany moment. Now that we just talked about tiny shifts, we'll go to the other extreme.
Mhm,
But 2016, and I think you know this story, but I'll have you bear
mhm,
with me. But 2016, I at this point am just under 10 years in the photography business, so about 15 years in the industry, but in wedding photography just 10, and been working really hard, since I got out of photo school. Just like I said, hustling, grinding, doing all the things, working my way. And across the front page of the website was a picture of Sudan, which was the last northern white rhino in the world, as well as the armed rangers that were guarding him 24 hours a day to keep him safe, because he is the very last male of his species. And I've always, like I said, been deeply passionate about environment, animals, grew up writing stories about the rainforest. And it's always been the idea that, quote unquote, someday when I do climb over that hill of success, then that's where, okay, great, I'm going to go save elephants. I'm going to go do all this stuff. And very quickly realized, a lot of time has already gone by. This crisis is currently happening as I'm sitting here. And, I don't necessarily feel like I'm, on the precipice of being what I thought was quote unquote successful enough to be able to really truly have impact. And so fast forward, I was like a mental debate in my mind of like a flash second of like, okay, great, you can like quit everything and literally go feed elephants in Africa, or but then, how many elephants can one girl feed? And, going through all these ideas. And there's actually people who are experts in that, doing that. And so what else could I do that like I'm uniquely suited for? And that's really when this idea of one of our businesses, which is called Render Loyalty Now, was born. And that was really the idea that, what I do have at this point is I know how to take photos.
mhm,
I know how to build brands and market a business. And I already have quite a bit of experience of knocking on people's doors and asking for permission to do something with little or no experience, and somehow persuading them that this is a good idea. And so that's exactly what I did. I started knocking on the doors of some of the leading conservation groups in Africa that were already doing this very well, and saying, hey, can I come photograph the animals that you protect and serve, and create fine art photographs and donate back. So once again, providing awareness and what they really need, which is financial support to fuel the boots on the ground that are already doing it well. So that epiphany was more focused on, once again, I think it's not just going, I think a lot of the times we're like waiting for, I don't know,
yeah,
it to
yeah,
just the right job,
it'll
the
make sense
big
when it
check.
happens.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and And sometimes it does happen that way, but I think a lot of the times it's more like this, like we're confronted with a moment that's like, okay, you get to choose whether you're just going to continue to wait or you're going to actually do something about it.
Yeah.
And this was one of those like, okay, I'm actually going to do something about it. And I'm going to put my, put my actions where my heart is. And so really the big takeaway was, being the change that you want in the world. I think it's really easy just on our dog walk, whether
Mhm.
we're picking up some trash on the street that just like, somebody just tossed. And, the old me 10 years ago would have like taken a picture of it and sent it to like our, village community management, like tell these people to stop throwing their trash on the, and like a little old lady. But, instead I still took the picture, but instead just pick up the trash, throw it away
Yeah.
and carry on, and I think so much of that is like, yeah, sometimes we just need to, if we're complaining, why is everybody so rude or why is the world like this? Like, how can we in our own small part do
Mhm.
our way to be a light against that dark? And so that, and once again, it can be in the smallest ways, but I think that really adds up as a collective really quickly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's like a psychological, like there's a definition of that when we see someone in trouble or we see something happening and we think everybody else is going to deal with it, so we keep walking.
Mm,
I forget the term. I
yes.
will look it up. But it's very real, and it's also part of how we are in the situation that we're in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. So that one, I think just bred more integrity and responsibility and also power. I think we all have the power. I think we forget that we have the power to actually make a difference in these small things. Like once again, well, I'm no Bill Gates, what am I going to do about it? Well, there are lots of people. And once again, I saw the weekend of Earth Day, a whole bunch of people got together and in Key Biscayne here, it was a million degrees, but they're with trash bags and picking up the trash. And that beach like was going to look so much better afterwards. And it was a few hours of somebody and then collective it cleaned like a whole stretch of sand. And so
Yeah.
I do think that we have more power than we sometimes think, and there can be these little changes that we make, like even one business's decision, like, okay, great, I'm gonna volunteer one day a month, or I'm gonna add $100 to each contract that goes to this, or
Hmm.
whatever it may be. But those they really do make a big difference.
Hmm. And they also help align us with our not only clients who are drawn to similar things, and thereby
Yes.
we're kind of spreading and sharing these ideas, um, but it also contributes to how fulfilled we are in the work that we're doing, right? So that our job is contributing to this thing that is even closer to our heart than our art is.
Yeah, and I think there is also kind of another caveat of that comes to mind, and this might be, I think this is a collective experience, but it's also something I'm noticing post COVID, and also just at my season of career as well. But I think, there was a time, especially for me in the business world, where it was like, if it's not a task that's working on advancing my business or me as an entrepreneur or me as an artist, then like, I don't really have time for it right now. That kind of
Hmm.
idea, like if it's not tied to progress, and, that's like, if you're ambitious, I'm talking to you, then like, don't really have time for that. This idea of like slower living or these other things, like even picking up trash on the beach, like, I just don't really have time. And
Hmm.
and the caveat of that I've learned, and I think COVID kind of taught us all a little bit of this, that whether it's tending to your garden or picking up trash on a beach, or going for a walk with your dog in the forest or whatever, that there are all
Hmm.
these things that are either people you're going to meet that are just going to surprise, delight you in some way, or you're going to have that epiphany, or just you're going to create white space that finally, things align and make sense. And all of these things that yes, you don't know exactly what it's going to do. Just like, if I spend 2 hours on my social media calendar, I know I can probably make 7 posts, and that's, a direct result. This is an indirect result, but
Yeah.
I think that it's something that's so important. And that was kind of going back to the Royals in all my looking through, because they, were in the UK. So it was like magazine after magazine of newspaper after newspaper and all the pictures. And what I noticed a lot was there was a lot of slow living. There were a lot of pictures of them like in their gardens, on their horses, or, sitting in a beautiful spot painting watercolors. And you go,
Yeah.
well, yeah, they're the royals, so they have all the time in the world. But I said, there's a lot of people here in the US that are very privileged with time and money and otherwise, and maybe aren't,
Yeah.
calling the time in their garden their sense of worship and like that. And I just this appreciation of slower living and having white space for these things that bring those indirect results.
I love that. I love that phrase, making white space.
Hmm.
We often talk
Hmm.
about white space in art and in design and stuff, but we have to do it in our lives. And
Hmm.
we can design our lives intentionally with this, because when we do that, it gives us the brain power to figure out these things that are deeper and more meaningful, and I don't, maybe not more meaningful, but add meaning um
Hmm.
into our lives, so that we're not trying to make it all the time. We can get so anxious and so hell-bent on things being a certain way, and we have to reach these targets. And if we open up a little bit of creativity and appreciation and sharing and community, then those other things will either come, or they give us a different perspective on how it is that we're moving through our lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, have you ever spent much time with a border collie, like a purebred border collie?
I don't have a purebred, but she's partial, and
Okay.
I understand.
So if you've hung out with a border collie, you
Yeah.
know that border collies in general, they're not a big fan of white space.
Mm-mm.
They're like, what am I doing? I got to be on a job. I want to
How
be on a
about
job
now?
right now. How about now? How about now? And so we joke all the time, but my husband and business partner Chad had a border collie growing up, and when I first met him, they had this border collie, and that border collie, he made jobs all the time, and it was
Mhm.
sometimes he was just watching that fish tank and making sure that that fish was doing exactly what same thing with the toilet. Is that doing what it's supposed to? Okay, then that, and giving
Yes.
himself jobs. And so I think we also want to be mindful that we don't want to inadvertently, in our pursuit of growth and be building business,
Yeah.
really become border collies where we're, dare I say, a little too neurotic for a white space.
I think that might be the quote from the show, Katie Mary. Don't be a border collie.
And everyone's like, not me. No, not me. I can't relate to that at all.
This is fun. What breed would you think embodies this mindset of?
Oh, yeah. Well, and you guys can all self-diagnose. Like, for example, it is a purebred golden retriever, like he can talk to anybody, like
Mhm.
greets everybody with a wagging tail, like goes into any room and knows everybody instantly.
Yeah.
Um, and when we first started remote work and with him working in the business, the golden retriever in him was like, great. So we take naps for like 3 hours a day, right? And I'm like, whoa, 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 buddy. What do you think this is going to be like? That's not what
That's not
running
how
your own
we
business
do.
is. Yeah. But that was the golden retriever going, yeah, I know how to run a business. I'll be up in a couple hours.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I will be refreshed and ready for a
Mhm.
walk.
Yeah. So pick your breed of choice
Mhm.
as you're thinking about how you operate.
But maybe not border collie.
Yeah. And I had a border collie and lab mix. That's what our
Mhm.
axle was. That's a great combination. The lab brings just enough where there's enough border collie for the intelligence, the drive, the focus. So
Yeah.
that's the other thing, like sometimes,
You mix them up.
yeah. So sometimes you just need to like go, hey, I just need a little bit more lab right now. I just need a little bit more chill. So,
Ooh.
and that's what white space is all about, really, because you can just go, hey, guess what? This Saturday, we're going to give ourselves some white space time. And even if it's, when's the last time you went and walked in a museum and just wandered,
Mm.
and just looked at stuff, or,
Yeah.
gardens or anything like that. I think it really is important.
It really just brings clarity. And so does, and you're a runner. I'm a runner as
Yes,
well. Um, I see white space also in being physically active, in
absolutely.
just leaving, getting out of the office. You're in commune with your body, like
Mhm.
fully you are a fully physical being, and it lets your brain just not think about the crap for a little bit, or like think about the worries and the anxieties and the things that are weighing on you. And virtually every time I go out, I come back and I have a solution.
Mm,
And either the
yeah.
solution is it doesn't bother me anymore, or I have come up with a concrete thing, or like a way to answer an email that bothered me,
Mm,
or oh, okay, now I have like a marketing idea that I can start working on.
yeah. And isn't that funny? And I mean, that's really where I've talked about this, where I decided to do kind of like a no days off anymore. And it doesn't mean that some days aren't less intense than others. You know, some days it might be a walk instead of a run, or a yoga
Mhm.
session instead of like a Pilates or weight training class. But and it really is born out of this idea that at least at minimum for 30 minutes a day, just
Mhm.
committing to body movement. And that, I think, for me, in addition to the benefits for the body, it's really more about the mind than anything
Yeah,
else.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Did you know that always, or did it come to you? Did you
No,
experience it?
well, I started this darn streak January of 2020 and
Oh, it's
have
been
kept it going.
nice work.
I know it's been a while. Decided to do it for 30 days and then just said, well, why stop now? And then, of course, it was COVID. So it was really like, well, why now stop? And then I was a year in, and now we've just got to keep going, apparently.
Yeah.
And I think, what I did realize was the days that you're like, it's not going to happen. Like,
Mm,
this is the day that the streak is going to end, because, I'm either flying for more than 24 hours. I've had that before. And
mhm.
I'm the person in the corner of the airport lounge doing a yoga video on my phone, or I literally, get in after a red eye and I've got to go straight into something else. And those are the days that you actually need it the most. And that
Yeah.
kind of just saying, hey, I'm committing to doing this and giving myself that time. That's actually like when you really have to advocate on your body's behalf.
Yeah, I totally agree. Those are they have the biggest impact because you are pushed the furthest, you're exhausted, or you're overworked or whatever.
Yeah.
That is what your body needs at that time. And to
Hmm.
not do it is, yeah, it's a disservice for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have
So
you
even if it's just a walk. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you this reminds me of, I'm reading the book The War of Art.
So good.
Yes, and I read it 10 years ago, and I'm reading again right now. And this conversation also reminds me of the resistance that we have as artists.
Hmm.
And this resistance, like anytime there is resistance, it's there. It's there for a reason. It's there to tell you something.
Of
And
course.
if we can look at that as an invitation or an opportunity to find out what that resistance is, or to do the thing that the resistance is telling you not to, that's
Yeah.
where the biggest rewards are.
Yeah. So one of my mentors, James Wedmore, he explains this in the sense of, so for example, even like some of the biggest obstacles or challenges or traumas even that are showing up in your life, um, can once again be asking you to examine and look at this. And he explains it, or his mentor does, as it's the universe or life showing you the areas in which you are still not free. That our objective of being here is to really, at the end of it all, to really just be free, free of that resistance, free of those things that are holding us back from our potential. And so it really is shining a light on the areas in which we still have work to do in those
Mhm,
areas. And it might just be guiding us in that way, to understand or see something differently there.
mhm. So what are you working on now?
I
What's
mean,
coming next for you?
always at work. Yeah, always at works. A lot of great things. Obviously, the education bit has been incredible in the sense that, often we teach what we need to hear the most. And it's been an
Mhm.
invitation for me to dive deeper on some of the things that I'm passionate, but once again, to have a purpose behind
Yeah.
it is really great. So, and like you said at the beginning of this, to also to step into rooms, to sit at tables that you maybe probably weren't previously qualified to sit at, to learn new skills, to push yourself. And so I think I've been obviously in wedding photography for a long time, and luckily the industry continues to evolve, and the expectations and weddings continue to morph into bigger and better things. So that's always a challenge, but I've also wanted to continue to be challenged in new realms. And so that's absolutely where I'm focusing my growth, leadership, entrepreneurship, business, um, obviously earth, and really being an advocate for the natural world and animal beings is a huge part of that as well. And so definitely continuing to work on that, and embarking on a couple remodeling projects, which there's all sorts of lessons and learnings in these types of things.
I'll have to have you back on once the
Yeah,
house is done, and then we can talk just about that.
yeah, yeah, because that's like a whole nother yeah.
Yeah, I
Learning.
I am often amazed. I've been with my partner for almost 15 years.
Wow.
And yeah, and I'm always learning stuff about him. Like every
Mhm.
new thing that we do, I'm like, "Oh, isn't that interesting?"
Yeah,
And if I look at it with interest rather
yeah.
than expectation, it's much more uh it's a much nicer experience than if it's with what my perception of what should happen.
Yes,
You
yeah,
know?
I totally agree. It's good to operate from a place of curiosity. And I think also it just makes life more interesting that way.
It
At the
really
end of the
does.
day, if we're so rigid and just hell bent that we're right and the rest of the world is wrong, it's just not going to be as enjoyable of a ride.
Yeah, absolutely. I have three questions for you, and they're kind of
Okay.
like my hot seat questions.
Okay.
Um, what is the some of the best advice, or perhaps advice that continues to play in your brain that you've ever received?
Oh my goodness.
Just little quick questions.
Yeah, little quick questions. Um, the first thing that came to mind, I can't say on this podcast, but I had a great uncle who we lost recently, and he had a lot of funny isms. So his isms always come to mind first.
Uh-huh.
But I'll stick with his sister, who is my grandmother, and she always said to me that patience is virtue,
Mhm.
and I do think that is pretty darn applicable, that when in doubt, often patience is one of the things that, in addition to our ability to continue to be resilient and show up and work, we have to have this virtue of patience.
Mm, I love that. I love that. Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah.
Um, second one, what is the worst advice that you ever got? Or the least helpful?
Well, yeah, and this, I think it's not necessarily advice, but it's this notion that I think we see that's pretty prevalent, and so it might be a little controversial, but I've written about this before, that this idea of like I'm a self-made millionaire, or I'm
Mm,
a self-made blah blah blah, and I think this shows up in the artist world as well, that I'm a true original, nothing has ever, this is all straight from divinity, and I've received no outside support or inspiration. And I say it kind of like that because I just think it's pretty darn ludicrous to think that walking through this world, unless you really were raised by a pack of wolves, but then the wolves, once again, should be
yeah,
who I wasn't self-made. They helped make me who I am,
yeah, yeah.
that really it really takes a village. And even whether it's books or teachers when you're younger, or influences of art and inspiration, that we are a sum of the collective. And yes, we have our own unique talents and sources and secret sauce that we bring into the mix. But the idea of like going it alone and self-made, that somehow that's better than
Yeah.
having mentors or getting support, or sharing freely, I
Mhm.
that's a I think that's bad advice. And I think
Yeah.
that we should all be more generous and open to not only receiving but giving, what we can share as much as possible.
Yes, I agree. I agree. The next the next question is, what is some of your your favorite advice that you, or like something that really speaks to you that you like to share with others? Other
um
than all of the education that you've
I
created.
Yeah, I was like, this whole podcast. um
Or like in
But
a
I
word,
do,
if you had like one sentence that you could say to somebody like before they walked out the room.
yeah, and
What would you
I
remember?
do think it might simply come back to abundance, that when we are coming from or living or being or embodying abundance, that we are going to be more generous, we are going to be more caring, we are more likely to be the change that we wish to see in the world, and we are going to realize that we're all interconnected. So I think, when we are in scarcity, when we're in our heels, when we feel we're backed in a corner, it's going to bring out the worst and the most fear and the most discomfort. So as much as possible, doing what we need to do on ourselves and in our worlds to continue to put ourselves up in that position to come from abundance and to really be generous, to be kind, and to realize that we're all connected. Because I think also that not only when you realize that you're not alone, you actually aren't, anybody that feels that, you really aren't, that this is a collective, and your people are out there. Sometimes you just haven't necessarily met them yet, and I think you might find them in unexpected places. So
A beautiful sentiment.
yeah,
Thanks so much, Katie. I am deeply appreciative of you being
of
here.
course. Thank you so much for having me. It's a true pleasure.
All right, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope that today's guest brought you a great value. I hope that what I have created here for you is helpful. If it is, please feel free to reach out. If you don't want to reach out to me directly, providing a little review, like leaving a review either in words or just in stars, immensely helps people to be able to find this podcast. So if you could take a couple seconds to do that in appreciation for this, that would be amazing. And also, if to bring us back to the beginning where I mentioned Storyteller School, being able to sign up for that so you can have access to a $1,000 discount before the end of December. So I hope to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Have a beautiful day, and I will talk to you in the next episode.